You crest the next hill, tired from travel, badly equipped with few coins on your person. Nestled in the valley is a small village, its few chimneys trailing wisps of blue smoke into the evening air. What sort of adventure could you expect to find in such a rustic and forgettable place? Well, these lands once fell under the shadow of the temple, and even now these barren hills and hidden fells are thick with secrets ripe for the taking. Hi everyone, I'm Garrett, and today we're going to talk about the classic, the unforgettable, the truly old school T1, the Village of Hommlet. Now, this is a really special module to me, and one that I imagine you feel the same about if you've actually played it, and I'm really excited to talk about it with you today. So let's get the rundown of T1 out of the way first. So T1 is its module code. This module was authored by Gary Gygax for the first edition of AD&D. The booklet clocks in at 24 pages, including the maps that are going to be used, and contains details on the village of Hommlet and a nearby dungeon known as the Moathouse. T1 is specifically written as a module for new players to help them learn the ropes. It's famous for being the first module in the T series, which detailed the early mega dungeon, the Temple of Elemental Evil. Now, while T1 was published in 1979, gamers who wished to play through the rest of the T series and the temple itself would have to wait until 1985 when T1 was republished in a collection simply entitled T1 to 4, the Temple of Elemental Evil. For the purposes of this review, I'm going to focus on the version presented in the T1 to 4 collection, as this is the one that I own, and I'm the version that I'm most familiar with. Given the size of the town and the dungeon, which is a 2-level location with a total of 35 key locations, it's going to take most parties probably 2 to 3 sessions to complete this, depending on the size of your group and how long you play during any given session, and how desperate they are to kind of go through every single room and deal with every last kind of encounter. Now, before we go further, I just want to address something very specific about this module and the way this review will work. Obviously, T1 was authored by Gary Gygax, one of the original creators of D&D, one of the fathers of the hobby. Gygax is rightly held up as a titan, perhaps like the biggest titan of role-playing games, and this means that sometimes when discussing his work, it can be really difficult to level criticism or maybe even praise sometimes due to his immeasurable reputation. I just want to say before I start that I'm looking at this module not as a historical artifact from which to draw conclusions about the nature of role-playing. I'm reviewing it in a practical sense for people who may be considering running it, in the here and now. That means that you might not agree with everything that I have to say, and that's completely fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but I'm looking at this from a practical point of view of running it now. Now, let's get my bona fides out of the way before we begin to crawl the details of T1. Normally, I could just tell you how many times I've run the module, but actually, in this situation, I actually can't, just because I've run it so many times. I think I've probably run it around 5 times. The first time I encountered this module, though, was as a player, which is pretty atypical for me. I don't actually play that much and never have done. It was probably in my earliest days of gaming, still at school, and in my early teens, I was acquainted with my friend Ed, who ran the school's D&D club. Ed ran a 2e game for about 8 of us, and we played every single day. At lunchtime, rain or snow, summer or winter, we were inside playing D&D. And Ed was probably running part of the T series from what I remember, like basically every session of every year. When I first joined, however, the party was already at the temple. That was they were at like T3 and 4. I was playing a magic user, Moathouse, which had been sort of loaned to me by the other players. I think Moathouse was actually a sort of GM PC being run by Ed, but I can't kind of clearly remember now. Now, while I had a blast at the time, all the other players kept talking about the great Moathouse that they cleared earlier in the campaign. I was desperate to have a go at tackling such a place for myself. A couple of years later, with a totally different group of players, apart from Ed, I asked Ed if he'd run the Moathouse for us, which he did. And ever since then, it's been one of my absolute favourites, even if I was killed by the snake in room 12 on the first level of the Moathouse. So what's the kind of through line of this module? What makes it compelling? What's it actually about? Well, it's actually fairly simple, but there's a lot of cool tone setting going on. It's not just interesting encounter design. And this is what's going on. Several years ago, this land was the site of a great battle between the forces of good and the evil forces of the Temple of Elemental Evil. Now, while the ruler of the temple, Zugtamoy, the demon queen of fungus and decay, was eventually defeated and locked within the lower the lower levels of the temple, the region has remained an area of kind of sinister ruin. Recently, a cult has started to emerge, attempting to occupy and empower the temple and its denizens once more. Some of these people are simple bandits, ruffians, kind of outlaws, and others are more formal cultists. One of these cultists, Lareth, has set himself up in a ruined fortress in the area, which the locals call the Moathouse. So this is a dungeon set from the temple. It's like a kind of ruined castle nearby. Also in the area is a small village called Hommlet. Hommlet is a peaceful place where most people follow the old druidic religion, but there's a growing concern that the Moathouse has been reoccupied. It'll be up to the player characters to tackle the denizens of the Moathouse and save Hommlet from the rising threat. That's what T1 contains, the Moathouse and Hommlet. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about what makes this module enjoyable. What are its strengths and what are your players likely to face? Let's start with the village itself. It's a flavorful mix of religious tensions, colourful NPCs such as the druid Turjon, and a couple of characters who are clearly the retired adventurers from Gary's own group. What's likely to strike you as a game master reading this is the fact that it is super detailed. For each of the locations, the general store, the chapel, the tower, the inn, which is amusingly called the Inn of the Welcome Wench, the information that's provided is kind of really, really comprehensive. Just for the church, which is a relatively small chapel, like barely even attended by the residents of the village, most of them follow kind of like druidism, there's 15 keyed locations. The Inn of the Welcome Wench has 28 keyed locations. I love this price list from the Inn of the Welcome Wench. I mean, just look at this. So many varieties of booze. As a teenager reading this, I finally learned what a Jill was. But what I really adore about this list is the inclusion of regional varieties of drink. I often find that if you're looking for new and strange items to kind of put on your tavern lists, Google throws up things that are, for the most part, too kind of high fantasy for me. Things like owlbear steaks and bottled fate and all kind of like really strange, like very, very weird things. I like the idea of using drinks with regional heritages because it helps communicate a little bit more about the world's geography and its other cultures without just emphasizing its kind of difference from our own. And oft commented upon inclusion in the village's write-up is the detail of everyone's wealth. Gygax, true to form, explains where like every glass copper piece is hidden, and there's some pretty funny details about like, who buries their wealth under their house for safekeeping, almost as if he's kind of expecting players to go about stealing every last bit of loot they kind of like look upon or like even get a sense for. And maybe they are. I spent many a youthful afternoon perfecting the art of like pillow stealing in Morrowind, so I kind of get where he's coming from. One thing that I've always found really useful is that with the module having been in circulation for so long, is that there's like a slew of fan-made resources such as maps of the town and the Moathouse. This has in the past made it really easy for me to run the module, especially when I've run it online, like using Roll20 or like Owlbear, with lots of variations of the basic maps available. It's also worth mentioning that now that Goodman Games did a sort of remaster of the whole temple, which includes T1, in like this enormous collector's set. There's some really cool details in this, but it's a little like kind of unwieldy to use at the table really easily, so it's kind of just more of a collector's piece. Now, once the players have learned about the Moathouse and set off in that direction, what are they likely to find? I'll tell you, they are likely to find a bloody brilliant dungeon. The book details how the characters may like wreck their edged weapons, hacking their way through the briars and the thickets on their way to the Moathouse. And when they finally do arrive, they're met with this crumbling ruin. There's a cool encounter outside with some giant frogs, and the drawbridge is all kind of rotten and they can fall through it. There are multiple ways that the characters can enter the Moathouse, and they'll be rewarded for caution. It's quite likely that the bandits that occupy the kind of upper levels of the temple will learn of the party's presence before the players realise that the bandits are kind of like watching them. This lends itself really nicely to the old school mindset many of us are trying to capture, a lack of preparation or caution or care in which the players just kind of mindlessly stumble into the main courtyard is met instantly by the bandits shooting them down from arrow slits within the Moathouse itself. It can kind of start this really horrible massacre if the players are really reckless. Now, if they make it inside, there's a series of rooms with some bandits and some dungeon vermin. That's the top floor. But when they make it downstairs, they're met with a whole other beast of a place. The dungeon, which is run by Lareth and his goons, is rife with traps, undead, ogres, a giant crayfish, and there's like loads more. Pretty much every encounter is crafted and enjoyable, so I'll just talk about a few that stand out for me. Now, firstly, there's a room with an ogre, Lubash the ogre. He's pretty much the only named NPC in like any module that I've ever like read or written that I can remember, or like, whose name I can remember off the top of my head. And it's because of a couple of memorable encounters I've had with him. He's not so much of an interest apart from how my players once encountered him. It was about 10 years ago, and I was running the Moathouse for a bunch of friends late one evening. One of the players, Hardy, was playing a gung-ho, comically zealous paladin called Roland, after Roland from, the paladin from The Matter of France. Well, anyway, Hardy was having a great time going room to room, and he was literally kicking the doors in. And I was getting a bit annoyed with this. Like every single room was like, oh, I kicked the door in, I kicked the door in. So, okay. Anyway, so when Roland kicked the door, which was actually kind of rotten and mouldering, his boot went straight through it, getting his leg stuck. And cue an encounter with Lubash, the ogre. He's like wielding like Roland and the door as like a club, having grabbed the trap leg from the other side. Everyone is screaming. It's like really, really, really good fun. Another encounter I love, just for the simplicity of its design, is there's a falling portcullis. The gate drops just as the party walk beneath it, cutting the group in half. It always becomes kind of really fraught as enemies swarm in from both sides, and the characters have to desperately find a way to get the portcullis up or regroup, or kind of both. But it just forces them to think outside the box because the fighter can't instantly come to the rescue. And, I don't know, potions like Potion of Gaseous Form are going to be really, really helpful. Now, the module is really great, but we need to talk about the issues with the module and how you might want to address them. So firstly, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of detail in the module, especially in the Village of Hommlet. But is it all actually that useful? No, to be honest with you, it really isn't. You don't need to know that the Stonemason's 3 apprentices class as level 0 militiamen with specifically 5, 3, and 2 hit points each. This is slightly overwritten and one of those kind of excesses of the old school for me. Similarly, knowing that the cabinet maker in town gets his apprentice to do most of the rough work is also kind of useless to me as the game master. The most egregious over-explanation in the village, though, is that of Rufus and Byrne, 2 retired adventurers who live in the tower. It's clear that these 2 were once player characters in one of Gygax's games. But once that kind of interesting tidbit of gaming lore is out of the way, I don't think that these 2 actually add that much in terms of kind of interest to the player characters. Their stats and the descriptions of rooms in the tower take up nearly an entire page's worth of space when combined, lending me to think that this is just a kind of bit of self-indulgence on Gary's part. That's okay and cool, I suppose. I'm the sort of Gary that enjoys a bit of self-indulgence at times. It's just that, in all the times I've either played or run this adventure, my players have never bothered to interact with Rufus or Byrne. Maybe that's just the way we roll, though, and, maybe your kind of like mileage with it or varying, they might find them really interesting. And to be honest with you, this is largely the only issue I can find with the module, and I am nitpicking at best by, drawing attention to this. The only other thing I can think of, which is minor, is that there's a series of tunnels beneath the Moathouse, specifically this one. The book says to tell the players that their characters are impossibly lost if they travel just a little way into them. That's it. No warning, no potential save, nothing. The characters are irretrievably lost to the dark tunnels if they go too far in. Time to roll up some new characters. I just thought this was just kind of like a bit silly. What if the players decided to use rope or something like that to kind of find their way back? I usually just ignore this assertion from the book. Besides, these are all relatively minor issues, and I'm done saying negative things about T1 because on the main, it is absolutely amazing. Now, this brings me to my final words on the module. What, if any, are the sort of complementary fancies that might support you in running T1? What sort of books or films or games should you engage with, which might lend a bit of inspiration? I thought really hard about this, and trying to say I couldn't come up with any particularly good films, novels, or short stories, and I was just about to say, no, there kind of aren't any that are really specific to this module. I was struck by the thought, or reminded of the thought that T1-4 was actually made into a video game. Developed by Troika Games and published in 2003, The Temple of Elemental Evil was a bit of a janky ride. Never really hitting the mark as well as other D&D RPGs at the time did, like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights. Still, it is held up as a really faithful adaptation of the T-series and continues to have a loyal following even now. Your mileage with that may vary. Now, that just about finishes my thoughts on T1, The Village of Hommlet. I hope you found it interesting or inspiring and been a bit of, food for thought. Let me know about your experiences running this classic in the comments. Below, you'll find a link to the module on DriveThru, as well as a link to my own game, the free version of it, Journeyman Expert Master. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this. Like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. I'm Gary, and I'll speak with you again soon.